The room is quiet in the way only a long career can make it. Framed posters, a coil of leather whipped soft with age, a battered fedora that has survived more than most men. Sun pools across a desk where call sheets, old and yellowing, still smell faintly of dust and coffee. The hand that reaches for the brim is steady, veined, nicked by decades of work. He lifts it the way you lift a memory, carefully. Outside, the day is bright. Inside, it's a museum to the parts he played and the prices he paid. At 83, Harrison Ford moves with a measured patience that was always there if you looked beyond the swagger. The scar on his chin is a story. The stiffness in his shoulder is a chapter. The silences, a library. He is the face of adventure, the man who made running look like thinking, the star whose characters never quit. But the truth that makes your throat catch, is simpler and heavier. The older you get, the more you carry. The hat goes back on the hook. His eyes linger. You can almost hear the line that built a legend. It belongs in a museum. But to understand how we got here, how a carpenter became a myth, how the myth became a man again, you have to go back to the beginning. This is the story of Harrison Ford's ascent from anonymity to archetype, and the private costs that success extracted slowly and without mercy. It's the story of a man who outlived his era's heroes, outlasted the studio's narratives, and kept flying even after the sky turned against him. We'll trace the first wounds, the long testing, the quiet reckonings, and the late-life solitude that fame cannot cure. If this story moves you, tap like so others find it. Legends are easier to carry together. Chicago, 1942. The radio crackles with war bulletins. Ration books sit like passports to a smaller life. In a hospital on July 13th, a son is born to Dorothy and Christopher Ford. She a former radio actress, he an advertising man who once worked as an actor. Theater, in other words, was not a strange language at the dinner table. It was a dialect, present but not prescriptive. Harrison grew up in the Chicago suburb of Park Ridge, where winters taught patience and summers baked courage into boys who biked farther than their mothers liked. He wasn't a prodigy, not in the way magazines like to print. He was a boy who didn't fit, a kid who felt half a step behind the joke and a step ahead of the trouble. At Maine East High School, he found a small stage and a bigger feeling. When the lights came up, his skin fit. But the applause didn't tell him who he was. It just told him he could be. College at Ripon in Wisconsin was supposed to shape him into something sensible. He was on the 5-year plan not by ambition, but by confusion. He tried philosophy, he tried English, he tried to follow rules that seemed designed for other people's minds. Then, in his senior year, he signed up for a drama class because it was easy. Easy until it wasn't. Because the first time he felt a scene click, he realized ease and truth can be cousins. He stood a little taller. He saw a door. But doors don't open without costs. After graduating in the early 1960s, he married Mary Marquardt in 1964, took a studio contract with Columbia and later Universal, and learned what it means to be introduced to America as a face you forget. Bit parts, a cowboy with 3 lines, a bellhop who doesn't get a tip. The studio system, even in its loosening years, still taught the same lesson. Do as you're told, be grateful, wait your turn. And what if your turn never comes? What if the camera loves your silhouette but not your name? What if you're too something, too wry, too quiet, too unpolished to sell popcorn? There's a micro scene that says more than a resume. He's in a 1-bedroom in Los Angeles. The refrigerator hums with an emptiness that makes a noise all its own. He looks at the rent notice. He looks at the baby pictures on the dresser. He picks up a circular saw, not a script. The man who will embody Han Solo and Indiana Jones becomes first a carpenter. Not for glory, not for glamour, but for groceries. He rips oak. He sands corners. He learns to measure twice and cut once because real life doesn't care about second takes. But the woodshop does something the backlot never did. It gives him the respect of results. A door is crooked or it isn't. A cabinet fits or it doesn't. And the rumor, true enough to matter, travels that this carpenter is reliable, discreet, and smart. He builds for people who tell stories for a living. He fixes a door, and the door opens into a room where the future is sitting, cross-legged on the floor, writing. The first wound was not poverty, it was invisibility. He was a worker whose work was excellent and unnoticed. If you've ever felt your gift arrive and have nowhere to put it, you know this ache. He kept the ache. He kept the sawdust in his hair. He kept going. Still, the world was turning. In 1973, a film called American Graffiti would pin a specific kind of American nostalgia to the screen, like a butterfly under glass. It would also intersect a young carpenter's path with a director named George Lucas. A small role, yes, but a noticeable one, and more importantly, a night in which the air smelled like gasoline and possibility. He was on film in a way that suggested he could stay there. Yet beneath that glimmer, life remained stubborn. Children to feed. A marriage under pressure from a profession that gobbled time and returned uncertainty. The studio doors were half open. The bank account was half empty. The man who would later pilot the Millennium Falcon was carpooling in Los Angeles traffic, late for an audition he would not book. That's not tragedy, that's Tuesday. But Tuesday is where character forms. He kept building. He kept taking small parts. He kept carrying the wound like a secret engine. The audition room on a warm day in 1976 is a piece of Hollywood lore because it reads like fate masquerading as coincidence. Lucas and Brian De Palma are screen-testing young actors for Star Wars and Carrie. Ford has been hired to read lines opposite the hopefuls, steady, unshowy, a human metronome for other people's rhythm. And then it happens. Lucas hears an attitude in the line, a slightly crooked delivery that says this character has seen things and chosen sarcasm as armor. Harrison reads Han Solo, and the room hears the click of a cultural lock finding its key. Star Wars opens in May 1977 and makes history. Not instant, not automatic, but inexorable. Lines around blocks, toys in living rooms, a new myth stitched into popular imagination. Ford's character is the rogue who chooses the cause, the loner who learns to stay. He's funny without asking, brave without posing, romantic without therapy. Box office numbers swell. Hundreds of millions domestically and worldwide in late 1970s dollars. And with them, the machine's appetite. The studio wants more. The public wants more. The boy who built cabinets gets his name on lunchboxes. But the victory ledger has a cost column. Fame delivers the role. It erodes the person. Privacy thins. Strangers assume they know your soul because they've memorized your swagger. Scripts arrive that want the grin but not the depth, the gun but not the doubt. Typecasting is its own gilded prison. You can walk any time in theory. In practice, the rent's higher now. On the house, on your psyche, on your heart. He fights back the only way that makes sense, by choosing other edges. Blade Runner in 1982 with Ridley Scott, a future that looks like it has a migraine, a detective who doesn't know if he's human. Witness in 1985 with Peter Weir, an urban cop hiding in Amish country, a man learning that silence is also language. The latter gets him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor at the 1986 ceremony, a data point that matters because it says the industry sees him beyond the blaster and the bullwhip. He follows with The Mosquito Coast in 1986, a risk-heavy portrait of obsession, Working Girl in 1988, where he is Rye's support of a woman's ascent, Presumed Innocent in 1990, where guilt and grief wrestle. The climb is not just higher, it's more interesting. And then there's 1981, the year Raiders of the Lost Ark arrives like a rediscovered cereal, crackling with old-fashioned momentum. Indiana Jones is equal parts brains and bruises, a scholar who bleeds. It's an instant archetype because it gives you permission to be smart without being soft. The fedora is iconic, the jacket, second skin, the whip, a punctuation mark. Sequels follow. Temple of Doom in 1984, Last Crusade in 1989, and the box office becomes something staring back from the paper like a dare to top it. But then, the body registers the tab. During Temple of Doom, he injures his back badly enough to require surgery. Stunts he insists on doing leave the kind of bruises that muse. As they heal, was it worth it? He keeps going. He always keeps going. That's the myth. That's the man. The 1990s crown him a king of adult thrillers. Patriot Games in 1992 and Clear and Present Danger in 1994 make Jack Ryan a household name in a way spreadsheets can measure. The Fugitive in 1993 becomes one of the decade's defining chases, and while Tommy Lee Jones takes the supporting actor Oscar, Ford is the moral engine of the film, a doctor who refuses to surrender his story to a lie. Air Force One in 1997 reimagines presidential resolve at 30,000 feet and gives the culture a line it still quotes under its breath, "Get off my plane." Yet beneath the momentum, contradictions hum. He is publicly modest and privately exacting. He dislikes celebrity, but accepts the bargain that comes with craft at scale. He wants to vanish into character, but the planet recognizes his walk. He can request control. He cannot demand absolution from the human costs. Marriage strains and ends. He marries screenwriter Melissa Matheson in 1983, and their collaboration and companionship become a ballast. But the life is heavy. The hours are heavy. The expectations are heavier. In 2004, after years of strain, the marriage ends. Respect remains. So do the changes that divorce enacts on any family. But then, the sky. He has been a licensed pilot for years. Fixed-wing helicopter, the kind of pilot who logs hours not for thrill but for serenity. Flying for him is not escape. It is order. Not for glory, not for gossip, but for quiet. He volunteers for search and rescue. He lifts hikers out of trouble. He knows the checklist and the cold math of altitude and airspeed. In 1999, during a training flight near Santa Clarita, his helicopter goes down. He survives shaken but intact and accepts the lesson the sky gives every pilot. Respect is not optional. He keeps flying. He keeps acting. He keeps being the contradiction. Risk without recklessness, courage without performance. The 2000s and 2010s bring returns and reckonings. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in 2008 is a reunion that pleases some, frustrates others. The appetite for nostalgia is always hungrier than the meal. Then The Force Awakens in 2015 returns him to Han Solo, older, wearier, still trying to outrun a history that isn't interested in finishing lines. The opening weekend numbers break records. For one brief cultural moment, the old music plays like it's new, and then the story turns with a blade. Fictional, yes, but felt. Han dies, and a generation exhales in shock. It's a narrative choice that seals a myth. It's also a public rehearsal for private goodbyes. But then, the machine bites back in the most literal way. In 2014, on a set at Pinewood Studios, a hydraulic door of the Millennium Falcon malfunctions and crushes his left leg. He's 71. Bones break the way time does. Suddenly, irreversibly. He is airlifted, repaired, rehabilitated. He comes back. In March 2015, while piloting a vintage World War II-era trainer, Orion PT-22, he suffers engine failure and crash lands on a Santa Monica golf course. The images are brutal. A plane on its belly, a pilot bloodied but alive, the sky reminding him that even experience bends to physics. He heals again. He keeps flying. Still, the edges sharpen. In later years, runway miscommunications and near misses draw headlines. In 2021, while filming Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, he injures his shoulder during a rehearsal, another reminder the body now sends as memo and manifesto. The invoice for all those decades is due. Behind the data points, 1977, 1981, 1985, 1993, 2015, lives a more delicate arithmetic, age plus expectation plus mortality. Friends and colleagues pass. Carrie Fisher, luminous and ferocious, dies in December 2016. Peter Mayhew, the gentle giant behind Chewbacca, in 2019. Sean Connery, who embodied Henry Jones Sr. in 2020. Each loss is a private ache with a public echo. Each memorial helps a generation understand the paradox of surviving your story. The longer you live, the more empty chairs you count. You can pick many fractures in a life this long, but one day in March 2015 clarifies the stakes with the clean cruelty of an X-ray. An engine coughs. A pilot declares an emergency. There is no runway. There is only a field of clipped grass and the 10,000 calculations you make with muscle memory and prayer. The plane hits, the world tilts, time fractures into before and after. A man known for walking away from explosions on screen suddenly needs strangers to cut him free in silence because fear makes conversation vulgar. He is carried into an ambulance not as an actor, but as a father, a husband, a friend, a man who suddenly understands how close yes and no live in the same second. Reports focus on the miracle. He focuses on the margin. He studies the cause. He accepts the failure. He refuses the seduction of dramatizing what a cockpit already knows. No one wins a forced landing. You simply lose less than you could have. The fracture isn't only physical, it is philosophical. The risks he made look easy were never easy. The body will not be bargained with. The clock will not stop simply because the third act isn't done. And so, in the years that follow, he calibrates. He returns to work slower, more deliberate, less interested in proving, and more interested in finishing well. If tragedy means song of the goat, the old Greek whisper that glory and sacrifice dance together, then this is the line that divides youthful daring from elder wisdom. Dark night in his world is not spectacle, it is repetition. Rehabilitation exercises at dawn that look like prayer, a shoulder that warms reluctantly, a gate that consults pain before it decides. What do you do when the roles you created are young enough to outrun you? How do you walk back onto the set of your own legend when your body is sending you footnotes about gravity? Does what he has always done. He goes to work. On some mornings, that means lines and marks. On others, it means being still enough to listen to a director half his age who grew up with his posters. The tragedy isn't humiliation, it's distance. Distance between what you can imagine and what you can execute. Distance between the roar of 1981 and the hush of 2023. Distance between your friends at the rap party and the people missing from the group photo. He keeps a pilot's discipline in his living. Checklists for the ordinary. Hydrate, stretch, read, rest. He cooks. He fixes things the way a carpenter always will. Quietly, with satisfaction measured in level surfaces and precise corners. He spends time with Callista Flockhart, the woman he married in 2010 after years of partnership that proved itself through seasons, not headlines. He is a father who knows the strange math of love, more given, more left. But solitude grows its own season at this age. Fame is a crowd that thins after the premiere. The phone rings less, or it rings with ideas that echo earlier work. Isn't that the stealthy cruelty of longevity? The world thanks you by asking you to repeat yourself. Rhetorical question: what keeps a man from becoming a museum of his own past? Craft, curiosity, stubborn wonder. And yet, losses come like weather fronts you learn to name by smell. A colleague's funeral, a message that begins with "I thought you should know." A memory that opens a door and reveals an empty chair. He shows up to tributes and speaks with that careful, practical tenderness of a man who doesn't trust speeches, but trusts gratitude. He does not weep into microphones. He lets his pauses do the grieving. Money? He has earned it, lost some, given a lot. He has championed conservation for decades, serving with Conservation International and lending his name and time to forests and rivers that do not buy movie tickets but buy oxygen for your children. Not for headlines, not for politics, but for planet. The work is humble, patient, necessary. The tragedy is that it is also Sisyphean. For every acre saved, a new threat clears its throat. And in the quiet, the other contradiction returns. He is a private man, whose most private moments have occasionally been public accidents. When you mishear a runway instruction and cross a line painted on concrete, the news cycle treats your day like a parable. Was he careless? Was he lucky? Was he done? He will not answer because he cannot. The pilot in him knows the truth. There are flights you remember for joy and flights you remember for relief. He has cataloged both, and he wears the catalog the way he wears that scar, without apology. But the aches are cumulative. The role of Indiana Jones demands a sprint that life now issues as a brisk walk. The role of Han Solo is a goodbye letter embedded in a blockbuster. The role of Deckard in Blade Runner 2049 is a ghost kneeling beside his own myth. He gives what he has, then he goes home. And home is where the quiet asks the questions the press cannot. Who am I without the hat? Who am I when the camera stops? Who am I when the last scene wraps and the crew applauds and the producers shake my hand and I drive away under a sky that remembers every mile I've flown? Something unexpected happens when you keep showing up past the point where everyone thought you'd retire. The work simplifies and deepens. In his 80s, Harrison Ford steps into roles that do not require running so much as reckoning, an aging therapist who can't fix himself as easily as he helps others, a Western patriarch learning that authority is not the same as love. He returns to Indy for the Dial of Destiny in 2023, letting age sit openly on his face, letting the camera see the cost. Reviews argue the way critics always will. Audiences argue the way families argue at Thanksgiving about what should have been done with the house. But something tender and inviolable is on that screen. A man closing a circle. Not for numbers, not for noise, but for narrative. He receives tributes that feel like folded flags. Cannes in 2023 saluting both the myth and the man. Industry rooms standing not because nostalgia ordered them to, but because gratitude did. He accepts with the unease of someone who knows ceremony can't hold the hours that bought it. He thanks the crews, the directors, the writers. He thanks luck. He thanks the audience without making worship of it. This is the tone of a man who has learned the difference between praise and meaning. Late life meaning, in his case, is built from three materials: craft, caretaking, and courage. Craft first. He never insisted on fireworks when the pilot light would do. Listen to his line readings across decades, and you hear the timing of a jazz drummer and the economy of a carpenter. He makes space for you to feel. He does not sand away his roughness. He aligns it. There's a scene in Witness where he learns to be still. There's a scene in The Fugitive where he learns to be loud without shouting. There's a scene in Blade Runner 2049 where he learns that memory can be generous even when it isn't precise. That's late craft. Not tricks, but textures. Caretaking next. He cultivates the land where he lives. He pilots toward trouble when trouble has coordinates. He lends a platform to conservation with the urgency of a man who has seen landscapes from 1,000 feet and knows their fragility isn't theoretical. Not for applause, not for awards, but for air. Courage, finally. Not the stuntman kind, though he has that too, but the elder kind. The courage to show up in your 80s and let the world see you as you are. The courage to say goodbye to a character the planet believes is bulletproof. The courage to apologize when you've erred and to learn when you must. The courage to fly again when fear whispers that landing once was grace enough. Yet beneath the meaning, the tragedy's outline sharpens. For a man who defined motion, slowing down feels like exile. For a man who built myths, watching those myths outlive their makers is a strange mercy. For a man who kept flying, hearing the world ask if he should is a question that sounds like love and lands like doubt. What remains? Family around a table where the conversation is safe from headlines. A marriage that has endured long enough to have in-jokes about time itself. Adult children whose lives are their own, not his filmography. Friendships distilled by attrition into something more like kinship, a hat on a hook, a whip coiled like a question mark that doesn't need an answer. He is alive. He is working when he wants and resting when he must. His age is no secret. It is an accomplishment. He still loves the smell of avgas and old paperbacks. He still dislikes publicity more than gravity. He still measures his words the way a pilot measures fuel. Enough to arrive safely, none to waste. And he looks out sometimes at an empty runway at dusk, the kind of light that turns aluminum into bone, and he understands that tragedy for him is not scandal or collapse. It is the slow arithmetic of endurance. You survive long enough to carry more names, more aches, more echoes. You earn the right to say, I was there, and the duty to add, and I remember who wasn't. Still, in that arithmetic there is dignity. Still, There is a kind of light that evening owns and noon cannot touch. Still, there is this gentle truth. Some legends don't burn out. They keep walking, slower, truer, toward a horizon that knows their name. We return to the hat on the hook. The room is the same. The man is not. Outside, the world hums with newer stories, noisier heroes, faster chases. Inside, a quiet inventory stands witness to the kind of career that dares to outlast its own headlines. At 83, Harrison Ford remains the most human kind of legend, marked by risk, tempered by loss, held together not by perfection, but by persistence. The tragedy isn't that he aged. The tragedy is what age requires him to let go. Friends, speed, the illusion of invincibility. The grace is what he keeps. Integrity, craft, and a gaze that can still make a line sound like a choice. If this moved you, like and share so others can sit with it too. And tell me, honestly, what moment in his journey hit you the hardest and why? Some stories sprint, this one endures. And endurance, when you listen closely, sounds like a man hanging up a hat, turning out the light, and walking into evening with the kind of strength that doesn't need to be seen to be real.